Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiT.
This is Floss Weekly with Randal Schwartz and Jonathan Bennett. Episode 538, recorded July 17th, 2019. Leo Laporte. This episode of Floss Weekly is brought to you by NetScout. Meeting the digital demands of today starts with a bold new IT strategy. NetScout is delivering a new perspective, visibility without borders, to guide your digital success and data center transformation. Get seamless visibility and monitoring for performance and security. See how at netscout.com. It's time for Floss Weekly, the show about free, libre, open source software. I am your host, Randal Schwartz, merlin@stonehenge.com, bringing you each week the movers, the shakers, the big projects, little projects, projects you may be using every day and not aware of it, projects you may want to download right after this show. Today's probably not going to be one of those. But
hey,
first, let me
knock it off.
Hey, shush. Shush, you're not on yet.
You might want to download something. Go ahead. Shh, quiet.
Let me first bring on my lovely and talented co-host, Jonathan Bennett. Jonathan Bennett. Jonathan, welcome back to the show.
Hey, Randal, it's good to be here once again. Boy, this is going to be a fun day.
This is going to be a great day. This is going to be one of the most fun shows I have done in quite a while, although they're all kind of fun, which is the best part about doing this show. Today is okay, first off, I got to tell you, it's always about, this week and where you're located. I am home for a change. I am just down the street from OSCON, where I'll be heading to after the show, because I want to go see if there's other guests that we can bring on. And Jonathan, I bet you're in your some flyover state?
Yes, flyover country here in Oklahoma, the corporate headquarters, the home office.
Always. And thank you once again for joining me and also suggesting today's show, because in just a moment, although you've already heard him, in just a moment, we're going to be bringing on my friend and executive producer, Leo Laporte. You might have seen him on perhaps a few other of the podcasts on the TWiT Network, and he's going to talk a little bit about how that all came together in a few minutes. What do you know about Leo so far there, Jonathan?
So I have memories of going to relatives' houses that actually had satellite TV, and there was this quirky little TV station, and this crazy guy doing a show called Screensavers. And after watching it for a few times, it became literally the highlight of going to people's houses that had satellite TV, because you have to remember, this was before the internet was really widespread. I'm dating myself a little bit here. Before the internet was really, really widespread, and for guys like me that really had a thing for computers and trying to understand technology, there just wasn't a whole lot of places to go to kind of feed the habit, as it were. But suddenly you find Screensavers, Leo Laporte. I mean, he talks about crazy things like Linux and Unix, and he takes calls from people with really interesting questions. I mean, it was a whole new world for me, and I was very sad when the TV channel changed into oh goodness, I don't even remember all the history, but things
G4,
changed
and
eventually.
Right?
Yes, G4. It became all about gaming and just kind of went downhill.
Right.
And then years later, I finally discovered that TWiT.tv is a thing, and it kind of recaptured some of those feelings, and well, the rest of it's kind of history. I'm here now, but so Leo and I, although he doesn't know it, Leo and I go way back.
Wow, awesome. And we will bring Leo on in just a second, but before we do that, we have a very important message, because this episode of Floss Weekly is brought to you by NetScout, accelerating innovation and operational agility that can meet the demands of today's digital world starts with a bold new IT strategy. As the pace of change continues to exponentially increase, so too does the risk of failure, raising the stakes for CIOs, architects, and IT operations. Simply put, digital transformation has changed the game, but NetScout has a different perspective, one that was built for an era of digital and data center transformation. It's called Visibility Without Borders. This real-time visibility extends to wherever your technology infrastructure and business applications reside. As the world leader in transforming packet data, NetScout's smart data delivers high resolution and continuous monitoring across any network, data center, cloud, 5G, and more. Already in use, monitoring and securing some of the world's most critical commercial and public service infrastructures, NetScout's next-generation level of visibility provides the holistic perspective that IT teams are seeking. See more at netscout.com. That's NETSCOUT.com. And we appreciate NetScout for providing sponsorship for Floss Weekly. And now let's go ahead and bring on our very special guest, very, very, very special guest, Leo. Welcome back to the show.
Hey, how you doing, Randal? How
I'm
long
doing
has
great.
it been? It has, and Jonathan too. How long has it been since I've been on this show? I think
it's at least a decade. It's probably a decade. Because you didn't come on for our 200th show or our 300th show. So I think it's got.
I have to tell you why. It's not against you. I don't believe in celebrating those numbers.
Sure.
That's all about
this is
us.
a random show.
Well, it's just all about us, not about the audience. So I've never thought that celebrating anniversaries, we could celebrate those off camera. However, I have to say, this is pretty impressive. We started this show how long ago? 2006, 13 years ago. So this has got to be one of the longest shows, if not the longest running show on open source software. I think that's something to be proud of.
It's probably the #1 show still out there for open source software, based on what I know from surveying the landscape out there. And it's obviously not the longest show on the TWiT Network. How did the TWiT Network get started?
Oh, you don't want to talk about that. Let's talk about open source software. I think that's much more interesting. Everybody knows it. Tech TV, blah, blah, blah. G4, 2004, Canada. Went to Canada. Got together some old Tech TV friends in 2005. This new thing called podcasting had come along in 2004, and I had been doing a podcast out of the radio show since the fall of 2004, April 2005. I say to myself, Leo, it was in January. We were at the Macworld Expo, and I got a bunch of people together at a bar, recorded it because I had all this gear, and 33,000 people downloaded it. And I said, whoa. This should be something we do more regularly, but I couldn't figure out how. And fortunately, somebody called the radio show using Skype that, January. And I went, actually it was later, but that actually sounds pretty good. But maybe, because I'm up in Petaluma, which is in kind of, an hour north of San Francisco, kind of in the middle of nowhere. And I said, maybe if we had Skype, maybe we could do a show with people Skyping in.
Right.
You know how that went. Anyway, by April... It seemed like a good idea at the time. By April 2005, we started doing a regular news roundtable called This Week in Tech. A lot of it was originally with my old friends from Tech TV, but it branched out over time to kind of the entire tech journalism community. And then we added shows. I think the next show was Steve Gibson's Security Now, Amber MacArthur. We called it Inside the Net. Eventually became the social hour. I can't remember what it became. And, we do Mac, Windows. We don't do a Linux show, and it kills me that we don't. But really, this has been the flag bearer for the network in terms of open source. And, you wouldn't think it to look at the shows that we do. But honestly, I am all in on open source. I think proprietary, at least for operating systems, proprietary operating systems make no sense. No sense at all. And so I feel like we should be doing a Linux show, but I think we cover the other side of it is that there's all this great open source software out there. And I remember kind of halfway through the show, maybe in the first or second year, we had somebody on at Google who said, it's really open. The biggest open source area now is enterprise. And I said, what? You're kidding. But that's turned out to be huge. So I think this is one of the most important topics in computing, to be honest.
Well, and I agree, and I'm very happy and proud to have led this show for so many years now and been able to get so many wonderful guests on the show. But let's talk just for a second, because part of this is about our history together. So we met on a cruise, right?
Yeah, I think that's the first time I met you. I was well aware of you. I had Learning Perl, of course, and I was a Perl fan. And so I knew who Randal Schwartz was. And then I went on Neil Bauman's Geek Cruises. They now call it Insight Cruises. I think my first Geek Cruise was 2006, a Caribbean cruise.
I think it was a Mac cruise.
It was what was they call it? Macmania, wouldn't they? And,
yeah, Macmania 3 or something back in the early days.
I have pictures from it. I can go back and find it. And it was awesome. And you were the, I don't know, do you still do it? You were the longtime geek kind of mascot of the geek cruises.
Yes, I still do those as often as I can.
Yeah, they're just great. I did about a dozen of them, and I wish I could still do them, but I can't get away as often as I used to.
Yeah, but I remember it was funny because I looked over at you, and I knew you from television. I knew you from G4 and Tech TV before that, and you asked me the question that was like my most jaw-dropping question I've had in my life, which is, so what do you do that's related to open source? And it was like, because you didn't connect the name apparently with
I
the
guess
fact
not, because I
was
had
on the
your book
that you read.
Yeah.
The book that you're reading, yes. And so it was really funny because you said, I'm such a big fan of yours. And I had looked at you and I said, well, I'm such a big fan of yours. So it became this sort of mutual, dropping ceremony there. But that was funny because then I also asked you about how does this podcasting work? Because I was thinking about doing podcasting for Geek Cruises back in the day. And we did that for probably 3 or 4 years. Or I was interviewing people that were actually speakers on the cruises and things like that. But then I remember the next time I met you in person was in Vancouver, Canada, Vancouver, BC. And you had invited me to be on, what was the name of that show?
The Lab with Leo. So that was I went up to Canada after Tech TV went out of business. The Canadian affiliate said, well, Call for Help's our biggest show. Would you come up here and do it? And I said, yes. Did it in Toronto for a while. They moved it to Vancouver, dubbed it The Lab with Leo, probably something about naming rights, because it was the same show as me answering calls. And I did that for a couple of years. And yeah, of course, a big part of having those shows was bringing people like you on.
Right, and I remember having the conversation while you were in makeup, I think. I forget the actual setting.
Those were the days when I got to wear makeup every day.
Back when we had to be on television a lot. But I remember that the conversation was that, Chris DeBona's show, this FLOSS Weekly, had paused. We had pod fade. And I had been on show number 9 as one of your guests. And then I said, well, what's it going to take to bring that back? And I remember you just said, well, bring me a guest and you can co-host. And that's how this got started for me. I mean, it was like I started bringing you guests. My first show was in, I think, 2009, maybe. Let's see here. I have it on a thumbnail here. Where the heck is it? My first show was in 2007. Wow, 2007, where I brought Josh Burkus on.
Yes,
and
that's right.
I had on for Postgres.
Yeah.
And the shows are really irregular at the beginning, I remember, because I didn't have a regular source of getting guests except people I knew.
Yeah, there was you were on July 20th, oddly enough, exactly 12 years ago.
Wow.
And the next show that we did together was Git, and that was September 1st. So, yeah, that's too bad that there was that gap. And prior to that, the last Chris DeBona, by the way, we should give credit to Chris because Chris really started this show. He's the open source advocate at Google, runs their open source program. And I had known him from SourceForge. And so he was a great person, but he only did about 16 or 17 shows. His last show was in March with Mad Dog, John Hall. And then I guess he got too busy at Google. And I don't know why. I think I didn't have the connections that Chris had to get those great people. I mean, we had the thing I love about this show, and I still love it to this day, is we get everybody. Everybody comes on this show. And so, in the early days, we had Rasmus Lerdorf of PHP. We had Guido von Rossum of Python. We had, Randal Schwartz. You may remember him from Learning Perl. We had really good people on. Jimmy Wales was on episode 7 of Wikipedia. Larry Augustin on 6. Miguel de Icaza, he was kind of not so well known back then, had just started this kind of .NET clone and it was great to have him on. But we needed somebody who could keep that standard up. And boy, getting you was a great coup, because I knew you knew everybody in the business, and you've been able to bring on, all the great people since. And I think the most important thing Floss Weekly does is open people's eyes to the breadth and variety and quality of software available in the open source community.
Well, and I've been told by people like SaltStack that I made their project.
Good.
That
I love hearing
because of my pulpit here, I'm able to say you ought to look at this project. And that's why I say what I say in the opening of the show, which is that things you may want to download right after the show and play with. And
right.
it's because
that was the bad thing about doing this show and why I stopped doing it, is because, and you remember this,
yeah.
I would install whatever it was we were talking about during the show. I'd go, oh, that's cool. Jonathan, you have that problem? It's like, oh, I got to have that.
There's been multiple times that we cover something and it's like, oh, well, add this to my to-do list. I won't do it during the show. But yeah, there's quite a few times it's like, oh, okay, I just got a new hobby.
Here's the drawback to that, at least in those days, was that was the same computer I was recording and the show on. So nowadays we have separate systems. But in those days, I think there were more than a few times the machine rebooted. And I don't know, I can't remember if it was with you, Randal. I think it was with Chris DeBona. There was one episode where I accidentally deleted the episode, not once. I called the guy back. We did the interview again, but twice I had to call the guy back again and say, I can't imagine what he must have thought of me. I accidentally deleted it a third time. I remember sending him a big, gift basket, coffee and stuff, because I figured open source developer coffee's got to be his fuel, and just apologizing profusely. I wish I could remember who that was, because whoever it was very gracious, because that's unacceptable. That's really not okay. But that was because I was doing this on one computer, and I would fire up Skype. I would call the people. All the people would be on one computer. Now each of you is on a separate computer. It would all be recording an Audition on that computer. After the show, I would then fire up Audition and edit it, and then post it. And if at the same time I'm installing MySQL, this is not going to go well.
Well, and Leo, one of the things I've seen over the 12, 13 years of doing this show is how at the beginning open source was sort of novel, and how would you make money at giving away stuff? Right. And one of the things
I think the eye-opener for me was when we had Sugar CRM on. And it was like, oh my God, this is better than other CRMs, and it's a business.
Right. And one of the things I've gotten to see over the years, and I've actually done meta shows on this that I've dropped into the stream occasionally, on how many different business models there actually are that will produce, actual income based on open source software. And that has become more and more the standard now. In fact, it's kind of funny. We have Simon Phipps on as a regular co-host, and he was the guy at Sun who was in charge of open source stuff. And we often call it channeling Simon now, because Simon is so drilled down into, why do you have any piece of your software be open core, or why do you have any proprietary software? He keeps coming up with these, so we call that channeling Simon when we sort of drill into the guest as well to do that. Have you experienced a similar thing in the way open source has changed over the years?
Yeah, I mean, I'm of two minds. On the one hand, I don't think closed sourced operating systems deserve to exist. I think honestly, operating systems are so well understood that there's so many reasons not to have, particularly security, closed source operating systems. I just don't, and I don't think that those really should cost anything. I think there's a support model maybe, but I think if you look at Ubuntu versus the Debian project, for instance, what those guys do with Debian as a community is remarkable. And that to me is the model for open source operating systems. But when you get to the application space, I'm not a purist. I'm not Richard Stallman pure in closed source application software. I think there's room in the world for both open and closed source application software. There are a few areas, security, encryption, where it has to be open source. It's nuts to use closed source in crypto. That's crazy. But in other areas, CRM would be a good one. There's room for both commercial and non-commercial, or I should say more proprietary and open software. So I like to see both exist, but absolutely clear that you can. How much did Red Hat sell for? $32 billion? It's pretty clear that you can be a viable business in open source. I just don't think that should be the first question that you ask about open source. I think open source is great because it's people, developers who love to be developers, who love to create a solution that helps other people and scratches their own itch. And to me, that's the prime. It seems to me that's the prime motivator, and what makes open source great. If you can make a living at it, everybody's got to pay their rent and keep themselves in potato chips. So I understand the need to do that, and I agree with the need to do that, and that's absolutely. I have no problem with that. And again, that could be proprietary or open. But that's not to me why open source exists. It exists for two reasons. One, because proprietary is bad when it comes to operating systems and important software. And two, because developers like to develop. They like to solve problems. They like to share their solutions with other people. They like to help other people. And I think that's a great motivation. And I think we should never denigrate that.
Absolutely not. I mean, it's also interesting that how a lot of what the people I interview here are all like, well, not all, but many of them are scratching their own itch.
Yes.
And as a result of doing that, they can share that with other people.
Then you get better software that way because you understand the domain. It makes sense, right? It's not that open source software shouldn't have a path to monetization. It's not that at all. I think that that's not the best place to focus. I think it should be for a variety of reasons. It's nice if you can make a living doing it.
Well, and yet there are so many ways to make a living doing this. I mean,
there's no question that that's possible now, right?
I'm a perfect example of that because I wrote some books about Perl.
Yeah.
And I created a Perl training company, and I still, my two primary clients, Captain Neil of the cruises that we talked about earlier, and also ZipRecruiter is my primary client right now.
We love the ZipRecruiter.
I know.
We love them.
Sponsor.
Right?
And not for this show, though, which is sort of weird, but that's okay. Because it's redundant because I'd be always talking about them anyway.
Yeah.
But the thing is that they've built a business model around leveraging, both of them built a business model around leveraging open source software to not have to pay expensive fees for proprietary software and things like that. They just pay me to fix things, to bring things in, to make things happen. And that's a very viable model for trying to, as we said at the top of the show, give away software for free. But really, that's not where the value is. The value is not in the software itself. The value is in what you can do with it, what it changes about the way you are.
And that's what you should focus on primarily, right? And what did Blender? I loved it that Epic just gave Blender $1 million grant.
Nice.
I think that it just shows you there's money out there. If you're making a solution that people need and use, there's money out there. There's an open source note-taking app called Joplin that I really live on, and they have a Patreon, and so I fork over a couple of bucks a month because I think it's worth it. And I know most people don't, even in the proprietary world. I remember Phil Libin at Evernote saying only about 5% of people ever bought Evernote because they had a freemium product.
Right.
So that's kind of how it is. I grew up in the era of shareware. I'm actually predate open source software. In my day, the most vital area of software development was hobbyist programmers writing shareware, where you'd give it away, but you'd ask somebody to send you $5 or whatever, and that was very vital. Remember going to the user groups, and they'd have the software librarian. That was a job of the user group, and he'd have a stack of floppy disks with all the kinds of and you could borrow it, so you could copy it at home and bring it back the next week. that was a very vital and exciting area. And I think open source just kind of follows on that. It's a big difference. The internet has empowered it in ways.
Well, there was Deakus. Deakus was huge.
Deakus, remember that?
Deakus is where I got Tico from, so back in the early days, yeah. So I learned to code in Tico pretty well. One of the things I want to talk about, though, before we have to let you go, because we're actually getting close to the bottom of the hour already, is that I wanted to talk a little bit about my experience with the show and what has changed over the years. And one of the most important things that changed was that I was struggling early on to try to get guests because, filling a guest slot every single week is a lot more work than most people at home realize. I can tell you that. But the thing was, I started getting calls from PR people who said, my company needs to be on your show. And this is starting about 6-7 years ago, somewhere in there. And that's when I knew I had made it, because that's when I knew I had finally become legitimate press. and that was really, really cool to finally be legitimate press. Not only that, but I now have people like the Linux Foundation and people like that emailing me ahead of their shows, where they're saying, would you like to come to our conference as press?
Nice.
Which is nice because starting about 3 years ago, I learned the trick of, applying for a media pass to go to shows for free. So I haven't paid for a show in like 20 years, which is nice. But originally it was just because I was a speaker, but now it's because of this show that I'm legitimate press now. And I think, is that happening in general across all of your projects?
Well, I mean, I think what I was really saying is it's not me, it's not TWiT, it's podcasting in general. For a long time, this happened with blogs too. Remember, people thought of bloggers as a guy in the basement in his jammies.
Right.
And I think
which is still not necessarily not true.
No, it is true. It can be true. I wish you'd put some pants on, Randal. But it also is the case in podcasting.
You can't see me from the waist down. What do you think?
Yeah, that's what they all say.
You don't know that I don't have pants on.
That's what they all say. I think the same thing was thought about podcasting even longer, right? I mean, and again, it was also because it was true. I remember in the early days of podcasting, a couple in a Kansas farmhouse, Dawn and Drew. Then they would record. They would record on a TV tray. And they would have a microphone stand made out of coat hangers, but that was podcasting. And while this is a little bit more elaborate, I think the spirit of it they stayed the same. But what's happened is the world has come around to it. And I think when Spotify bought Gimlet for $230 million, there's suddenly Apple apparently has just announced they're going to start paying a lot of money for exclusive podcasts on the iTunes network. I think this makes sense. This is. We're seeing this happen. Podcasting suddenly being embraced. And so for a long time, I remember very well going to CES and trying to get into a PepCom event as a podcaster and being turned away and being furious because I wasn't real media. But those times have changed. I think people understand that the media is not now the 3 big networks and the 5 big computer magazines. There's a lot more to media these days, which makes it hard, I'm sure, for the organizers of these events, because it's hard to know, is this a big podcast? Is this a big blogger? Is he a little blogger? They still ask me sometimes when we try to get press passes to send them clippings from our podcast, and I have to explain, well, it's not print. It's not a print podcast. I can't really send you clippings. You could go to the website.
Yep. Twit.tv/floss.
Thank you very much for that plug. We appreciate it.
And I also want to say, really up front, also, although it's not up front now, because it's towards the end of the show, but I really appreciate you carrying me without any ads for like the first 5 or 6 years, because I know that came directly out of your pocket to pay for the people.
Yeah, this is always, I mean, and frankly still is a pro bono effort. I mean, it doesn't, you're cheap, but
I've been told that before. I've been told that.
I estimate it. We don't have a really good estimate, but the cost of running the studio is roughly $1,000 an hour. So even if a show is a simple show, which this is a very easy show to produce, you do all the work of the production and bring the hosts in and bring the guests in and all that stuff. So that's why you're cheap. You're not a full-time employee. Although I hope we do pay you a stipend, right? We give you walking around money.
Yeah, a small percentage of what I'm sure you make off the show.
No, that's exactly wrong. This show, as I've been saying, and I will continue to say, is a pro bono effort. You know what that means? It's not pro Christa Bona. It costs us money to do it, but I'm glad to do it because it's so important. I think we would always have to do an open source show, and frankly, it kind of pains me that we don't do a Linux show. But I think that would also be pro bono. So here's the problem with getting advertisers on an open source show. They say, but that's competing with us in many cases.
Yeah, right? It is.
And that's somebody who's giving software away that we charge for. So I'm not sure we should be on that show, And as gorgeous as you are, Randal, I don't know if Crest white strips really are right down your alley, is what I'm saying.
Yeah. It's funny because I do recognize that a few of the guests we've had on recently, a few of the sponsors we've had on recently, not to mention any by name, were directly competing with shows that we did like just before that.
Yeah, so that's fine. Don't ever
like that.
Consider any of that in your editorial thinking. You are editorially independent. You should never worry about that. You should have guests on that compete with sponsors. That's fine. That's not your job. Your job is to be. So in fact, we don't ever talk about monetization with you. We like to get ads on the show. I think it's a good thing to do because it helps us defray the costs. But honestly, this show is a labor of love for you, I know, and it's a labor of love for us, and that's why we do it.
Well, and I keep saying, I've said it many times in this show, that as long as you keep letting me do this, I'm going to keep doing it. Just because I've had so much, I've been able to speak to some of the movers and shakers in the industry as a result of doing this show, and I've become. It used to be, as you know, that Learning Perl was sort of my claim to fame many decades ago now. Now, when I go to a conference, people are going, "I love Floss Weekly."
I'm so glad to hear that. That's really
and they
great.
never talk about my books anymore. They're always talking about that. Or if they do, they might say, "Well, I brought a copy of Learning Perl with me to have you autograph because I knew you were going to be here." But now this is my claim to fame. This is what I am doing, and it's been such a reward to be able to do that. And I appreciate your, especially now that I know that I'm a loss leader for you, that you're letting me keep doing it.
I'm sorry I even brought that up because I just don't want you to think we're making bank on this.
No, it's fine.
To be fair, we make bank on other shows. So I can afford to do this. I mean, if we didn't do very well on a number of our other shows, this is always the case that there are shows that make a lot of money and there's shows that make less money, and we try not to do too many shows that make no money, but there are sad to say a few of those, and but there's some things we think if you're going to have a tech network and talk about tech topics, if you're going to do Windows Weekly and you're going to do Mac Break Weekly, you better damn well do Floss Weekly.
Yep. Yeah, and I'm kind of grinning a little bit when you keep saying there's no Linux show, but really
you do a lot of Linux.
Is such a small part of open source.
Right.
And I think that it's important for me to understand that we're covering the entire spectrum.
That's right.
Because we are covering that, and that's why I go to OSCON and why I go to Scale and why I go to all these conferences, is to try to find things that are a little more out of the area, a little more not just Linux, because there are 3 podcasts I've been on. I can't remember all their names, but there are 3 podcasts I've been on that were like Linux Outlaws.
There's
before
some
it got
excellent
canned.
Linux podcasts. Yeah,
I've been on those.
Yeah, we're not trying to compete with those. I would say that this show isn't about programming languages either, But
No.
Linux and programming languages are a big part of what's going on in open source. So we talk about apps as well as operating systems, as well as programming languages, and all of them are fair play. And I think that if you look back through all the episodes, it's very clear that you've covered everything. I mean, I don't know, Jonathan, if you watched the screensavers because we installed Linux, but I think we were the first and still the only national television show to install Linux live.
Wow.
On the air. And this was back in the day. This was in 1998. It was Slackware, I'm pretty sure, and it was hard. And there's nothing more exciting on national television than to be going through X-free config step by step on the command line. Oh, that's fun. And then the TUI, that's really good. Good TV. But we did it because I believed in it. I still believe in it. I am this is a proprietary ThinkPad, but it's running Pop OS, and I still believe in that. In fact, honestly, don't tell the Windows Weekly guys, but the Windows is the last mainstream operating system not running on a Unix base, whether it's BSD for Mac OS or Linux or free and open BSD or Dragonfly. Windows is the last one, and Microsoft's putting a Linux kernel into Windows, and that I'll go on record. 5 years from now, Microsoft will abandon the Windows kernel and be an open source operating system. That's where their future lies. That's the future of the world. So open source, if you include Android, which is Linux, open source is clearly the dominant operating system architecture in the world, and it should be.
Of the 500 top supercomputers, how many of those are running open source operating systems?
I guarantee you none of them are running Windows.
Yeah, all 500 of them are running an open source operating system now.
Because honestly, unless you include BOS, and I'm sure you don't, it's open source and Windows. That's it. And if you're running Windows, you're insane.
Yep.
Or you have to.
Or you have to. And I know people have to. We do. I have to. But I don't want to.
If you take a look at the movement that Google's doing to get away from Android, moving towards Fuchsia, it's going to be even more interesting. Microkernel architecture.
Fuchsia's very interesting. Yeah, and it's open source too. It's on Git, right? Or no, does Google use Git now, or what do they use? I don't.
Well, so they've got a GitHub for Flutter and for Fuchsia. And for Dart, so all of their primary new language development is all being done completely on GitHub.
You'd be crazy to do a closed source language. Same thing. Yeah. And if you're using closed source crypto, say hi to the NSA for me.
Exactly right. Exactly right. So we're almost out of time, but let me just try to run down my list of things I still wanted to make sure to ask you. So what do you see in the future of open source?
Besides total global domination?
Sure.
Open source is everything that's right about technology and the internet. And we're seeing now, it's really sad to me because the internet has such promise, and yet we're seeing things like Facebook, Google, I have to include Google in this, Twitter, really become the garbage fires of the internet. And the last only hope and salvation is federated social networks running on open source software, open source operating systems, open source end-to-end encryption. That's what's going to save us. So if you're working in open source, or if you're doing God's work, and if you haven't opened your mind, I don't know why you'd be listening to this show, maybe you just strolled across it by accident, but if you haven't opened your mind to open source, it's time to really consider. Now, I'm not a Richard Stallman, dogmatist on this, but there's a great Reddit subreddit called Stallman Was Right that just every single day gives you more evidence why free and open software is the future.
Okay, how am I going to follow that up? But I will say that I've partied with Linus. I've partied with Richard. I hang out more with Linus.
I got Richard Stallman's. Actually, one of my greatest claims to fame. I've interviewed Linus a few times. I interviewed Stallman once, and he was hard to interview because he sends out a letter saying that this is at Tech TV, the entire network has to call it GNU Linux from now on, every single time. We kind of waffled a little bit on that, but I did get him to come on, play his recorder, and sing the open source anthem. So I'm very proud, and I believe there's YouTube video of that. If you don't believe me, I'm very proud of my contribution to the movement.
Nice. And so, what's the most complex thing you do running the TWiT network?
I don't do the most complex thing I do. Have lunch. I have a very, very good staff. People like our studio manager is running the board right now, John Slanina.
Exactly.
Our IT guy who's a contractor, I wish we tried to hire him 100 times. Russell Tammany is a genius on streaming video. We have a very, very good team. Patrick Delahanty, who does our coding. And honestly, after I erased that Floss Weekly twice, they don't let me touch the buttons anymore.
They don't let you go near them.
The most complex thing we do, really, in general, at TWiT is try to balance the content to try to bring people the best possible information, because our whole mission is to tell people, to teach people about technology and show them how they can use it in their lives to empower themselves and to make the world a better place. And the last few years has been almost a dystopia in technology, and I'm fighting to remember there's so much good in technology. This show always cheers me up. That there's so much good in technology, and that we all, as technologists, need to continue to push in that direction, because that's a tough job these days, and we can't let the bad guys co-opt what is so good about technology.
No, definitely not. Jonathan, I haven't let you talk much. Is there anything you wanted to ask before we have to let Leo go?
He wanted to ask me about blockchain.
Well, yes. That is our meme here on Floss Weekly. Everybody wants to be in blockchain. So, Leo, what is TWiT.tv doing to get on the blockchain?
Nothing. I don't know. I have 7 Bitcoins in a wallet that I forgot the password to. Does that count?
I guess.
Steve Gibson, the best story. Of course, we covered Bitcoin very early on. Steve Gibson read Satoshi's original paper, understood it, which is a lot more than I could say, and talked about it on an early Security Now episode, and in fact set up a Bitcoin miner. And this was back in the days when you could do it on a PC. He woke up the next morning and had dropped 50 Bitcoin in his wallet. 50 Bitcoin in his wallet.
Oh,
wow.
So at its peak, that was worth more than $1 million. He got for free, but this is the best part. I finally got Steve to admit it. He didn't back up the wallet. Kids, here's Uncle Leo said, back up your Bitcoin wallet. It's not large. I'm not talking about the blockchain. Just back up the wallet, the wallet.dat file. He didn't back it up. He erased the hard drive. He erased $1 million in Bitcoin. Although he could have got a pizza for that anyway, but no. So that's what we're doing with blockchain. We did for a while have a tip jar, a Bitcoin tip jar. That's why I have 7 Bitcoins. And I'm sorry, those of you who donated. It's not gone. I did back up my wallet. I have it. But and I've rebuilt the blockchain, which is, how big is it now? Hundreds and hundreds of gigabytes. It's absurd.
Right, yeah.
It's ridiculous.
I can't download it all.
Bitcoin is a joke. On the other hand, and I think LibreCoin is soon to be a joke. On the other hand, the notion of a distributed ledger that is fully accountable is a great idea. And so I think there is actually, I know it's it's kind of a little bit of a meme and it's a little bit of a trendy thing, but I think the concept of blockchain is not a bad concept. Bitcoin
it reminds me much
Really?
of what they used to say about the laser.
Yeah.
The laser was a solution that was invented, but nobody had the problem that it solved.
Right. Someday we'll have laser weapons, and then you'll be sorry. No,
so they invented it, and it was this cool toy. But then, the next thing that happened, CD-ROMs were a thing, and Blu-rays, and finally, we found a whole bunch of different things.
I think cryptocurrency is not a bad idea. And by the way, Randall, my hat's bigger than yours.
Yours is like way bigger. That's not to compensate for anything, is it? Don't shut up.
Anyway, so thank you for having me on, Jonathan. It was great to meet you. Thank you for the work you're doing on Floss Weekly, and of course,
yes,
Russell.
Sir.
Thank you,
Randall. I had to call you Russell one time in the show. Randall, you.
I know. Randall's fine. And thank you for coming on.
One L, not two. Okay.
Yes, one L. And thank you for coming on at the last second. Like I said, I had a cancellation this week from the OSCON people, so it's like.
Can I tell you one Russell anecdote before we go? One, just short one.
Go ahead.
We're getting on a geek cruise boat. I'd already met Russell a couple of cruises earlier. He walks up to me, hands me a piece of paper that says.
You mean Randall?
Yeah. Randall. Oh, no, I'm talking about Russell now. I hope you don't mind.
Oh, a different Russell.
No, Randall.
Okay.
I'm talking about Randall. Russell, our IT guy. I confuse you two. That's the problem.
Oh. Randall
walks up to me and hands me a little piece of paper that says, your email password is.
Yes.
It was correct. And he said, you're on the open Wi-Fi and your email password is being sent in the clear. I said, thank you very much. And then he continues during the cruise to go around to people. I said, Randall, you have to stop doing that. You're scaring people.
Well, it was really funny because we had I forget his name, the a security guy that had written columns for some magazine, and he had actually been giving a talk on Wi-Fi security.
Oh Lord! Lord!
And I said, and your password is.
Oh Lord! See, we should from now on those geek cruises have a wall of sheep, just like they do at DEF CON, because.
Yes.
But fortunately, the good news is in most cases now, email is HTTPS and your password is not being sent in the clear. So Randall's little game, his little party trick is over.
Not really.
There's still things you can do. Yeah.
There's still things. I always run the sniffer traffic wherever I'm at, and
you don't carry a Wi-Fi pineapple or anything like that with you, do you?
No, but I shouldn't really be doing that, given that I'm already a felon.
I know.
So,
I think that's kind of probably a violation of your parole or something. I don't know. Are you still kind of? Do you have limitations on what you can do?
Yes, I can't go to Australia or Canada.
Well, good news. Neither can Mark Zuckerberg, so you're in good company.
Well,
that's ridiculous. You can't.
The last time I went to Canada was to be on your show.
But you could go.
Time ever.
Oh, since then.
I could, but the problem is they actually stopped me at the border, trying to explain to me, and luckily they knew who you were, so they knew that I would be on the show. But they kept saying, "Why would you be on his show if you're not getting paid?"
So that was a trick question, by the way.
Yeah,
you're allowed to go to Canada if you're not getting paid.
Right.
If you're taking a job, if you're taking hard-earned poutine out of some Canadian's mouth. You're not allowed in. So that was actually a trick question.
I know.
They wanted you to say, oh, I'm getting paid. And they'd say, well,
no.
Ixnay and UA.
Well, but then they also brought up the felonious status in the same interrogation. So that's why I knew that probably the last time I was going to get to go.
Very hard to go across the border into Canada. They're as tough as the U.S. Border Patrol. And that's saying something. So bring your burner phones, kids.
We're getting off on a stray topic here, but Leo, it's been great to have you on the show. Thank you again for the last minute.
I'm the boss here. You can go as long as you want.
But you got Windows Weekly to do next, right? So
right. Yeah, Mary Jo and Paul are the boss, really. Yeah.
And what's funny about this show, and I'm not going to say it in contrast to some of your other shows, but I try to keep this to exactly an hour. Because I appreciate my audience.
I gave that up a long time ago. I'm trying to keep it under 3 hours now. You know that, right?
This is why I've unsubscribed to a lot of other shows. I'm sorry to say, because it's just, even at 1.5 speed, it's just
you need a
bit
longer
long.
Commute, Randall. If your commute were longer, you wouldn't mind.
I don't have a commute.
I know, that's why.
My commute is either 30 minutes or 6 hours, depending on whether you measure the airplane time.
Right.
So yeah, it's all good.
You need a longer commute. Then you wouldn't mind those long shows.
Thank you once again for coming on the show and for allowing me to interview you and reminisce a bit. This is all great. So thank you much.
Thank you, Randal Schwartz. Thank you, Jonathan. Real pleasure being here.
That was Leo Laporte, the Grand Poobah, wearing the Grand Fez. What do you think there, Jonathan?
I was a listener, just like everybody else. You two obviously go way back, know each other well, and it was fun to just hear y'all reminisce about it. It's also neat that that TWiT has such a buy-in with open source. Lets us do this. It's cool.
Leo's been a big contribution to make sure that this can happen, and I really appreciate that from the very get-go, from the way back at the beginning. I mean, it was like he got me into podcasting in the first place, doing the Geek Cruises Newses, and then allowed me to herald this show in new directions and old directions, I guess. We've got some upcoming guests. I want to talk about this before we run out of time here. We've got Justin Riot coming on next week. We still don't know exactly what his topic's going to be, but he works for a company that provides commercial support for open source software. But he sent us a list of topics, which we're still going to discuss. Free versus open source, modern enterprise, built on open source, why FLOSS is more secure because there are more eyes looking at it, which is something Leo brought up a few minutes ago. And what the heck is neural networks and why TensorFlow is amazing. That's coming up in next week, actually. Following that, we have serverless framework, which enables easy deploy for serverless apps. That's kind of fun. Just added to the schedule, I bumped into these guys at the Perl conference a few weeks ago, is Dancer. Dancer is a simple but powerful web application framework for Perl. So we've got the creator of Dancer and one of his cohorts are coming on to talk about that. It's going to be a fun show, I think. I'm actually written a couple of Dancer apps, so I have a sense of how that's all working. If you go to the homepage for this show, twit.tv/floss, you'll see the big spreadsheet for the upcoming shows. Sort of a little short right now. I'm going to try to get some people at OSCON this week and maybe a few more coming up soon. If you have any other suggestions, again, please tell the project leader or community coordinator to email me. Especially if it's not blockchain. we don't want to do too many more blockchain shows. Right. We have a live stream at 9:30 a.m. Pacific time on Wednesdays at live.twit.tv. We always take a number of questions from there. Sometimes the number is 0, like today. But it's always a number of questions. You can follow us at Floss Weekly on Twitter. We can follow me at Merlin, MERLYN on Twitter. I am at OSCON this week, although I am not actually physically there yet today. I will go check in and right after the show and go to the party tonight, which would be fun. I will be at DragonCon in Atlanta on Labor Day weekend. I'm going to give my talk on Flutter and be on 3 other panels. I'm going to be at All Things Open in Raleigh, North Carolina, which I highly recommend. That's in mid-October in Raleigh. You can go to their website to register, and they've given us a code of Floss Weekly, all in lowercase, all one word, to register for incredibly cheap. It's already a cheap conference, but I think it's like $99 to register if you use our code, so that's even better. Anything you want to plug there, Jonathan?
Sure. So, we've mentioned it before, but every Friday at hackaday.com, I do a weekly security column. I start writing that tonight, about 9 o'clock at night, to be able to cover as much of the news as I can. And then one other very interesting thing that I'm looking forward to, starting today, I'm going to trade out my x86 desktop for a Raspberry Pi for about a week. I'm going to run as a Raspberry Pi 4 as my daily driver and then write about it. So you can follow me at Twitter at JP_Bennett and maybe get some rants about that. And then also look for an article about that over at Hackaday coming before too long.
Sounds great. Jonathan, thanks once again for co-hosting, taking the other chair, although you probably didn't have much to do because it was basically a reminiscing day for Leo and me to talk about stuff going on. So even better. It was I think it was actually a pretty fun show for me. I don't know how it was good for listening to it, but maybe you'll be the proxy for the audience at home on doing that. So thank you once again for being my co-host.
Yep, I'm glad to be here.
Awesome. And we'll see you all again next week on Floss Weekly.